good friend of the show, Frank Pomata, is back to talk to us about creativity and how he's being able to unleash this creative side of himself to build fun and meaningful bonds with his grandson, Lucian, and how he's able to also use that creative side to create over 11 books about and with his grandson. You are going to be inspired to get in and really listen to this story and then be able to take that and implement some of these creative ideas that Frank is sharing with us with your own relationships. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. With Father's Day just a little over a month away, my book, My Grandpa's Grandpa, would be a great present for that grandfather/father in your life. So if you want to order your own copy, please go to my website, cool-grandpa.us or Amazon, and order your copy of my award-winning children's book, My Grandpa's Grandpa. Also, in case you missed it, I want you to go back to last week's episode, Naming Your Nemesis. I think that's a really good episode for you, because it talks about how you need to have something that challenges you and something that you can really enjoy overcoming and mastering when you have a chance. So again, go on back, listen to last week's episode if you haven't done so already. Without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Frank. Hi, Frank, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited for us to sit down and have this wonderful conversation this evening.
Back here again, Greg.
So last time, and we'll put a link to our first episode together, but we had you on really talking about your relationship with the grandchildren and everything that you're doing as a grandfather. And this time, we're pivoting over a little bit to talk about your experience with writing some children's books and how you got started with that whole writing process.
Thank you. Yeah, I think of my grandson sort of as my muse. He sort of unlocked something within inside me. I mean, I hadn't done any creative writing since college English classes. It's been an interesting journey. Who knew? I'm up to my 10th book now, and there's a 11th one that's kind of in the works that I'm still working on finishing.
Oh, very cool. And I did want to talk about what inspired you to start writing this, because I know you and Lucian get down on the ground and you play and you got cars and Hot Wheels and all that kind of stuff. But what started you on this path of writing the first children's book?
It's funny because you just never know, Greg, where inspiration will come from. And in my case, and this was, I want to say 2016, when Lucian was about 4 years old. This kid was obsessed with garbage trucks. Infatuated with them. You know, the ones with the arms that they lift the bin and it goes over? Well, we live in an apartment complex, and boy, he'd hear that beep, 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 and Grandma would go run out. Well, one day we were running around in town, and I ended up following one of these trucks at his behest, and the driver finally noticed us, and he honked the horn and was waving, and I don't know, we followed him several steps. When I came home, I just got out a lined pen and started writing a little tale that I called The Boy Who Loved Garbage Trucks. Now, for me, I just wanted to read that aloud to him as a little, I don't know, it was like a lark, you know. And next thing I know, my wife says, wow, that was really cool. You know, she said, you should, make that into a book. You'll have a keepsake. And I'm sitting here going, oh, wow, now I have homework. I had no idea how to do anything like that, but I was like, well, okay, yeah, that kind of makes some sense. So here I am, 10 books later.
And it's amazing that when we start through some of these processes and projects that we don't really know much about, all of a sudden we're learning things like how to put a book together, digitally and, beyond just a Word document, right? It's
Absolutely. I had no idea about, how to write a book and whatnot. And, fortunately I was able to find a rather simple website to do that on that for a guy like me who's a non-techie guy, that's exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
So now he's got a keepsake. I always buy myself an author copy, and that was the other thing. I wanted something that wasn't going to cost me anything to just lay the stuff out and have the book formatted. And the only cost to me is if I have to buy a copy for myself, or the only other person who likes these things that I've gotten is his other grandpa has taken a real keen interest in them.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Were these books like rhyming books, or were these much more of a kind of a laid out story?
What's funny is that it started out, that first tale was kind of rhyming and whatnot, and maybe even the second one too, but then they began to have, as I got more comfortable with each successive book, as something struck my interest, something he did, said, or maybe a hobby he was into at the time, a story arc form started to. I remember too looking at children's books that I still have that he has in his book collection. And I always liked that thing with some of the children's books where they had the dropped cap at the beginning of the paragraph. So I incorporated that little device into my books too, and the print's big too. So yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's brought us closer too.
Oh, nice. Nice. Well, and I love the idea of putting this thing together, because there's a number of grandfathers out there that probably do maybe something a little bit similar. They spend some time at the beach and maybe create a silly story with the kids, whenever, but then it gets lost, right? By next year, that pad of paper, whatever is, in recycling or and never to be seen again. But you've been able to find a great way to capture that and put it out there so that you guys have a copy to it and have access to it.
Yeah, it is nice. Definitely. And like I said, I'd never done any creative writing since college, but after that first book, like I say, the creative juices started flowing more. And what I did too is I often incorporate him either as a character or some way that was referencing him. Like in the last book, which is sort of a James Bond style book, I never name him, but I use his secret identity, which is Agent LT, for his initials, Lucian Thomas.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I love incorporating the kids into the books. I mean, I did that with mine, but it gives them something. So when he's 20 something years old and maybe starting to have kids or whatever, you can pull it out. Hey, this is what Grandpa did for me, and here's my book.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I have thought about that I have a sense that there will be. I know they're on his bookshelf in his room at home, but I have a sense that when I'm no longer here is when they'll take on more meaning, or when he's got children to share these. Go, yeah, my grandpa wrote these crazy stories about me.
Oh, sure.
Because they're very whimsical. I mean, I let loose. My wife is often kind of like, how the heck did you come up with that? And I pull ideas from all different things. I'm an omnivorous reader and whatnot. So pop culture, like I say, the whole James Bond thing, I just went with that whole story for him and all of his, his fancy devices and whatnot, and gadgetry and whatnot that Q would always come up for him.
Oh, sure. Now, you had talked about the creativity side coming back up, not having done creative writing since college. How do you think that connection with Lucian has brought back out that creative side in you? And
great question. I think what it is that I don't know if I told you last time we were interviewed, but my wife was a young widow when we met, so I've never had biological children, little ones that I grew up with. So Lucian is the closest analog to that. And when he was born, in playing and interacting with him, I'm probably not telling you or your listeners, you start to see the world through that child's eyes and that their sense of curiosity and wonder. And so by looking through that lens, I think that's what, it's tapped me into that sense of wonder and curiosity and thinking like, hey, what if,
And definitely the storytelling part. I think that's something too with fathers and grandfathers with little kids, is there's a natural inclination for telling stories. Well, and that's partly how little kids learn, right?
Yeah, sure.
all these little stories that they're reading, whether it's your book or somebody else's or whatever, they typically are relating something. And it's not, beating them over the head with something, but it's, it's the starfish that was mean to a friend, and then they had to make up and apologize to that friend. So it's teaching a little bit of a lesson there. And I think that comes naturally to us.
It's funny, Greg, that you say that, because it was his other grandfather who, reading the stories, said to me, he goes, each of these has a moral and whatnot. We can take this back farther, all the way to like oral history and like the Greeks and Odysseus and whatnot, and the Aesop's fables. I didn't intentionally write a moral into these things. I don't usually start with like, oh, I want to do this lesson. But somehow in the weaving of the tale, usually something emerges from the narrative. There's one about, probably one of my favorite book is called The Boy Who Thought He Didn't Like His Face. And actually, Big Ed, his other grandpa, was the one who actually provided me with the seed. He told me how Lucian, who happens to be a ginger hair, confided to him on a Christmas visit that he thought he didn't like his face because some freckles were starting to come out. So, knowing my process, Ed told me that and said, hey, I don't know if there's a story here or not, but this is something he said to me. And I said, oh. Now, because it was not something I clued into and this and that, it actually took me 3 months to figure out, well, what's the tale and how will I tell it and whatnot. And I ended up using animals, which I often have in a number of mine, as the storytellers. There's these woods behind us that we like to walk in, and he's often looking at the critters and stuff. And what I did is I found and made a grid of photos of animals with interesting faces. And when he goes in the woods sort of to ponder about his face and the freckles, he encounters an animal. I think the first one was a praying mantis, and it starts talking to him. And that leads him to the next animal, a rooster, who becomes his guide, almost like Virgil in one of the stories there, with Dante, and leads him through. And each animal ends up saying, oh, here you have a question, and this is what I like about my face and all. And through hearing them talk about their own faces and what makes them unique, an elephant, a rooster, praying mantis, what have you, he, at the end of the tale, comes saying, I guess maybe I do like mine. So it's a story about self-acceptance, I guess, in the end, really.
And that's powerful, especially as the kids really do start to develop and they start noticing those differences, right?
And the other thing is I use the animals as messengers for things that, I know, like when we go hiking, there's garbage in the woods sometimes, and the two of us get really bothered by that. We'll often take that out with us. At one point, I actually incorporated that into the story. There's like a fork in the road, and there's a pile of beer bottles in a plastic bag and this and that. And like the rooster stops him with his wing and says, what's wrong with you people? How could you do this and all? And Lucian is all chastised, so he like gathers up the stuff, and then for the rest of the journey, he's carrying this plastic bag until the end, where he throws it out. But the animal is delivering kind of a message of like, hey man, stop trashing the environment.
Well, that's great, because you get a couple of messages going on in there, right? It's like, hey, be courteous. You're trashing somebody's home,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't think about that when we go to the woods or whatever, that there's a whole bunch of critters out there. That's their home, and we're an uninvited guest, and then we're trashing it on top
Absolutely.
of it. So a couple of good messages there.
The other one, too, was that the animals talked, and he was incredulous at that. And he said, oh, we all used to talk, but you guys got too big for your britches, so we stopped talking to you.
Oh, nice.
So the animals were talking about how humans often see themselves at the top of the pile. And I was trying to sort of bring us down a notch, and through the animals saying, well, we all used to kind of talk and stuff, but you guys kind of got too big for your britches, so we just stopped talking to y'all.
Boy, that does sound like something with Aesop's fables, and it jumps right into that kind of alignment. What would you recommend to grandfathers who might be starting to reconnect with this wonderment and the storytelling? Maybe they, like a lot of us, right? We kind of went through college. Maybe we did some creative writing courses. Maybe we did some drama. Maybe we did, dabbled in some things. and then we get serious. We get too serious, right? And for that period of time, and now you've got a grandson or a nephew or a niece or whatever it may be that you're kind of connecting with, and it's starting to reawaken some of the stuff. How would you frame this up with those guys?
Anytime I'm a book lover, and so I've often gone to like bookstores and whatnot, or gone to book events where you'll hear authors speak. And a lot of times that kind of a question comes up, and the answer I generally hear is write what you know. And well, that's kind of what I do is I'll observe something he does, or he'll say something kind of interesting, unique, an observation or whatever, or something unexpected. Or there's whatever hobby of the week. Right now we're in the process of creating a business plan. They watch Shark Tank in his school, and he's 10 years old. He's going to be the next Richard Branson. He wants to create Whoosh Airlines. It's going to be a green airline. So he wrote the business plan, and I'm going to help him find venture capitalists. Anyway, so whatever hobby or interest it is, I kind of go with it. I'm not a dream killer. I used to run an after-school program. I never tell kids, oh, that's unrealistic, you can't do that. But I'll often say, well, okay, here's where you are today. How are you going to get there? So back to the writing part is having your awareness too. Well, what did I just see? What did I observe? What did I hear? Oh, what is he really into? Oh, he loves planes, or he loves Hot Wheels cars. Where can I take this? His stepdad is super mechanically oriented, and I crafted a tale kind of along the lines of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where I know his stepdad doesn't like him to go into the shed in the backyard. And so he goes in there, gets curious. There's some sort of a machine. He hears his stepdad come, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble. And he accidentally locks himself in there, gets shrunk down. Then he's got to yell and get help. And then Pop's looking for him and stuff and hears him. And he's got to elude a spider and a bird and other types of creatures, and he runs down an ant thing. So think about what you like, incorporate pop culture or other things, and it becomes a whole little mix, and you'd be surprised. And again, I think a lot of it is sort of releasing those guardrails. You talked about how it can become serious adults, and a lot of that is putting guardrails on our reality of what is possible and what's not possible. And when he and I play, my wife's often amazed at the imagination, and I'm just like, I just take the guardrails off and, and go with whatever scenario he comes up with, or sometimes he throws it my way. Like today we were playing before I got on with you, and he's in this whole airplane thing. He's got a bunch of airplane toys right there.
What I like about that is that you've also described a process that this has happened for you, and that other grandfathers can go through, right? Because it's not suddenly you're playing with a 4-year-old and now you've got this magical book in you. It's a process of getting down and playing. It's finding out what do 4-year-olds in this day and age like, or what do 8-year-olds in this day and age like? Because when we were growing up, it was cap guns and playing cops and robbers and playing army outside and doing, totally different thing from what these kids are doing. And
he's on his iPad right now. He wasn't feeling well. He came over here. Grandma's taking care of it. It's easy for her to take care of him here. And I'm often over his shoulder. I'm monitoring what he's doing, but he's also often teaching me things. He's playing an aircraft simulator game right now. He's like, so what plane should I fly today? Oh, I said, do they have an SR-31, the real fast one? Or and he's telling me about VTOL, and I surprised him by knowing what vertical takeoff and landing was, and he was telling me about this fighter jet that can do. So I said, lay it on me, and he teaches me new terminology. See, we've got to be open to learning from them. A lot of adults we kind of think we're the only ones, but he's giving me lots of teachable moments.
Oh, that's great advice, and a good reminder too that a lot of the learning is a two-way street with the grandkids and us. It's not just a one-way feed them everything we want. It's listening to what's going on, and then creating that relatable moment, right? Like the VTOL, the vertical takeoff and landing. All of a sudden you can pull out and go, hey, I remember Harrier jump jets.
told him, I said, do you know another jet that can do that? And I did. I mentioned that exactly. And then he taught me, and now this must be a new word because I don't remember ever hearing it. He said, when you get a perfect landing, I remember that being referred to as a 3-point landing. He says that the current terminology, the current lingo that the young people use, that's a butter when you get a perfect landing. So, okay. So we're coming in with this Harry, with this jet, and it's okay, we're going to butter this like a roll, like it's going on a roll, huh?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love it. And my kids used to play with those flight simulators when they were first coming out, when Microsoft was developing those things.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. And you can do different views. He actually asked me, he goes, do you want to do the takeoff first person, like, point of view in the cockpit? I said, let's do it. I said, why not? I'm along for the ride.
I think maybe you got a book in there about being a pilot or flying around the world or some such.
Well, I got to see where this whole business plan thing goes. I mean, he's going to have me. He wants me looking over this business plan, and who knows? I said, "Well, am I going to get a family discount on this new airline?" He goes, "Oh no." He goes, "You guys fly for free." Okay, I said, "All right."
All right. Good. So he wasn't going, well, we'll give you the 10% off.
I'm getting a full ride, apparently.
Yeah, nice. How has developing and writing the books affected the relationship with Lucian? And now that you're going on the 11th book, how has this been a connection point with you guys?
Yeah, it's interesting because he knows he's a character in them and all. I think he's intrigued by that. And sometimes we talk about, or I'll let him know what the book is about and whatnot. And I might even ask him, what do you think the character should do sometimes? But generally it's a solo thing when I'm writing it. But what I found out, he sometimes now is asking me to use my PC because he's at the age where he's learning, word processing in school. And I came home one day and there he is sitting at my computer using Word, and he was writing a creative story, a pirate tale called The Lost Island. And I mean, he had like 3 pages worth of stuff. And I was like, this is good stuff. And he even incorporated something from a video he showed me the night before where some guy took a fisherman in Vietnam or Thailand or something. There was a alligator that he helped and took something out of his mouth, a hook or something like that, and the alligator would follow him around and he would like feed it. He incorporated something like that, and that's the kind of thing like that I might do. Like, oh, you watch that, and now he incorporated it into the storyline, and then the nonfiction writing, watching it. He crafted this business plan. When he left the other night, Sunday, I copied and pasted that into an email, and the subject line to his other grandfather was, our grandson wrote this without any help from me. The only thing he got wrong on it was he wrote sweets for like these amenity cabins, and it was sweets, the candy, as opposed to sweets, SUIT. But other than that, I was just like, wow, damn, this came out of my grandson. Wow.
Nice.
So, yeah, I think the relationship is there. There's an interest in reading. I buy him a lot of books. He has no idea. He's got a biography of Richard Branson, an age-appropriate one coming, because I compared him to Richard Branson. And I said, do you know who this guy is? And I showed him a couple things online. So then when the other morning, I looked up on Amazon and said, that thing should be here tomorrow, so I'll lay that on him.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Feeding his brain. That's the way I talk about it that way. I'm trying to feed his brain good stuff.
Well, and you're keeping that creativity side going, which is great, because I think one of the critiques that, and it's certainly not new, but with school and teaching the kids to sit at a desk, do a task, it drowns out some of that creativity. And that's, what we were talking about earlier was, how do you get that back? Well, if you can keep that as part of Lucian's wiring, let's say, that's going to serve him really well.
I've often thought, I didn't like school growing up, and it wasn't that I don't like to learn. I'm a lifelong learner. I still love reading and stuff. I'm that nerd watching Discovery Channel, and I hear about somebody, I'll go get a book, a biography about them, like Mr. Branson. But I see how the way we do schooling in our country, anyway, it's the only frame of reference I have, seems to turn kids off to learning. Um, I believe all teachers should be taught improv as part of their teacher training. It would help with classroom management when kids are kind of, maybe misbehaving. But having run 2 after-school programs, that was one of the things. Is my motto was we sneak the learning in while they're having fun.
I love that. Have you guys been able to actually sit down and write a book together?
That has not happened, and I'll put the word yet. Okay. There's been some side by side where he's writing something. He actually said to me, "Baba, can you come in here?" He calls me Baba. He says, "Baba, can you come in here while I'm writing this?" Okay, I had no idea what he was writing. And that's when he laid this business plan. I'm going, what am I looking at here? I'm like, holy mackerel. So I'm sitting behind him, and he asked me a question or two, but essentially it was all him. My writing is mostly solo, but like I say, occasionally I'll share something and say, "Oh yeah, read this book and and what do you think of that?" And, occasionally I'll offer some input, but right now it's parallel. But who knows? Maybe it will converge.
Oh, that's cool. That'd
be nice.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I'm there's a few authors out there that have characters that have been going on for so long that they've now started having their sons come in and write it.
Yes.
Clive Cussler had done that before he passed, and I think Lee Child's doing that with his son. Now they're much older, but I still think it's kind of cool. Like, hey, Dad's kind of passing the torch. Here's a joint project that they're working on.
Exactly.
Yeah, being able to take it forward.
Similar to when we talked in our first interview, when we talked about my 2 grandfathers and the examples, they said, well, my one grandpa Carl was like a real car guy, and here I am a car guy. So he passed that on to me through osmosis, those rides we used to take to Coney Island together and whatnot, and here I am now, Mr. Gearhead.
Yeah. I want to ask you about this 11th book and what's it about and what inspired this particular book. And give us some details on this one.
Well, the tale, I don't know if you can see. The Tale of King Toad. Oh, boy, my camera is not in front of this thing. Got the cover here. The Tale of King Toad was inspired by, he got this huge stuffed frog. And I often ask him, he gives his stuffed animals funny names. He's got a crocodile or an alligator over here, and it's called Pick Pick. So he comes up with these whimsical names. So I said to him when I came into the house and he showed me this thing, I said, "Oh, well, what's its name?" And he laid on me King Toad. And immediately my wheels started thinking of a toad in like a medieval kingdom. And so that's what the story is. But it also is sort of like Gulliver's Travels and all, because there are these sky giants people, and King Toad's wife and son get crushed, and now they've got this mystery to solve. And it's a little boy of the sky giants who was curious about the creatures below and had no idea he did this. And so I'm going to try and weave this together as I first started, and I'm glad I stopped. And my muse kind of went silent because it was going to be like a war against the two and whatnot. And then I said, I don't really like that. That's not my philosophy. I'm not about war as a solution to things. And I've come full circle in 360 on that. And I'm going to make it about mutual understanding how the boy, I think, is going to get punished by his mother, the queen of the sky giants, by being exiled because she did harm. But the uncle, who was like the grand wizard, if you will, to King Toad, is going to propose that there be an ambassador from the Frog Kingdom to go up there. And instead of this mysterious 2 kind of polarized camps, now suddenly there'll be out of this tragedy, there'll be a bridge between 2 different cultures. We'll see where it goes. I'm kind of about 2/3 of the story arc in right now.
Sure.
But I'm glad I switched gears on that. Sometimes there's a reason, I guess, when you kind of get stuck. And I'm glad that I didn't go in the original direction I thought the story arc in my head was going to go. Like, I don't have the things all plotted out. Sometimes I just start writing, and it's funny. A cousin of mine's an English major. He watched me over the holidays. My uncle had passed away, and I went there with the 10th book mostly done. And I said, maybe the change of scenery. And I did a dramatic reading for them to kind of make them laugh, my aunt and him. And then I told him I was trying to finish this thing, but the change of scenery and having some downtime, I went out there. Well, he looked at me and he said to me as an English major, number one, he explained some of the things I was doing, the plot device and whatnot, but he also said, he says, I'm stunned. He said, there are writers, professional writers, who can't get more than a quarter of a page or a page out a day. Because I just watched you write 20, 30 pages in the space of 3 days. And he goes, and you just pumped out. He goes, and not only that, it's good.
How long are your books typically?
They've mostly been pretty small, 50 pages or less or whatnot. Usually more closer to 25, because they're aimed at a child. The last one, the spy novel one, was probably my longest one. That was about 140 or so pages long. But that was written at a different level.
Now, you brought up that spy one and talking about Lucian. This is going to be a left turn here, but stick with me. There was a pretty good movie that as a kid in the 80s that I really liked. It involved Dabney Coleman, and it was a kid that got like around a 12-year-old that got caught up. He was always fantasizing about being a spy or whatever and got caught up in something. And this Dabney Coleman character was kind of a make-believe character, but it helped him through whatever the real life thing was. Like the kid actually like came across something that he wasn't supposed to have, like the old spy technique of a dead drop, right? And the kid accidentally picks it up, and now he's part of this conspiracy. And the character that was in the kid's spy books or whatever was Dabney Coleman that helped him kind of navigate it. I'm going to have to, after we're off of this, I'm going to have to look that up. But folks, if you look up Dabney Coleman and remember him from, I think 9 to 5 was a big movie that he was in. And
Court, he was in that TV series, Night Court.
Oh yeah, and a bunch of different things. But if you look him up, it should be in his IMDb credits.
That's what I'm figuring. Yeah, I usually go to. That's my source.
I'm like, you were talking about it. I'm like, hey, maybe this is something Frank and Lucian would like to watch together. Maybe, I don't know if it aged well or not, but you know.
Well, for me, I always add half a star if he's in it. I always liked him in the role, and that he was funny as hell as in that character in 9 to 5 for sure.
Oh yeah,
even though he was sort of their nemesis.
Yep. Well, you always have to have a good villain to make a great hero.
Absolutely.
The hero is only as good as the villain, right?
True.
Now, what advice would you have for other grandfathers that they feel like they might have a story in them, and maybe they don't necessarily want to, create something to go to a publisher. Maybe they want to do something a little bit like what you're doing. Whatever that is, what kind of advice would you have for some of these grandfathers?
I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. Is like just have your if you're thinking along those lines, just have your antenna up and look for those moments, something that stands out that intrigues you or is of interest to your grandchild, and write what and incorporate things. We just talked about Dabney Coleman in that movie, and who knows what's sitting back there, but you can draw inspiration from all different places. So, and the other thing is don't feel like you have to have it all figured out. My stuff goes through at least 4 to 6 revisions, I would say, before I feel it's finalized. So usually though, I just handwrite on a line pad, and once I feel like that part is done, then I start to put it onto the PC. And sometimes I'm moving a paragraph around, or maybe I'm changing the wording a little bit, or looking for a synonym because I realize you have to use that same word 3 times in the last 3 pages. So and like I said, take the guardrails off of your imagination. Those adult guardrails that you can't do this or whatnot. Make stuff up. Just like George Lucas did. He made up the Force in Star Wars, and some of the other stuff like that. Whatever is of your interest. Your passing something along as we all are to a grandchild. And so maybe it's your passion actually that you end up writing about.
Oh, that's great advice. Now, Frank, I've had you on for a little while. Is there anything about writing, anything about your experience with writing that I didn't ask you that you'd love to share with us?
That's a good question. And you know what? I think we should state is the one thing that we haven't really said is that I'm not a professional writer. I'm a career counselor by day. I'm not an English major like my cousin. I do writing, of course, my job. So I would say to folks is don't be afraid of that writing process. And I was kind of saying that before with taking the guardrails off. And that is, it doesn't have to be at a certain level. It doesn't have to be Clive Cussler or some other hotshot, author that we all know. Just, write it and put it out there and speak from your heart, which is, I think, what the essence of your show is all about is our heart and sharing our heart with our grandkids.
That's great advice and great information. Frank, what's the best way that people could connect with you if they want to follow what you're doing and maybe reach out and say hi?
Well, I think we both know I'm big on LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn. Spelling of my name is Pomata, and Frank, look me up and hit me up. Tell me you saw me on the Cool Grandpa podcast, and we can start something up. If you want to bounce some ideas off of me, we can do that. I'm happy to kind of lend a helping hand.
That's great. Yeah. And folks, if you're out running around and driving or taking a walk or whatnot, I'll put a link to all this into the show notes so you can easily connect with Frank and look up what he's doing on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. This has been a blast, and I've really enjoyed catching up with you.
Always good talking with you too, Greg, and keep doing what you're doing. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Your book too. I love that you wrote a book as well. Let's not forget that, folks. If you haven't gone and if you don't know about it, my host here and friend has written a book called My Grandpa's Grandpa. He didn't know I was going to do that PSA, but I'm hitting it up, and I immediately bought a copy on Amazon, and I read it to my grandson once it came. So I need to give you that plug.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, have a great night, Greg. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed listening to Frank's stories, and I was especially inspired about how he's been able to really unleash that creative writing side of his personality. It's so interesting that as these grandkids come along, as we've aged a little bit more, how we're able to jump back in and really enjoy phases and parts of ourselves that maybe we've shut down over the years for one reason or another. I know you've enjoyed this conversation, and do me a favor, please share this with a friend. It's a great way to spread the news about how awesome grandfathers are and how important they are to the family. So, until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.